Mr. Chair, you are now live.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome to the September monthly meeting of the Maritime Advisory Board of the City of Annapolis. As is my custom, I will simply go around the screen as I see it and introduce recognize whoever is here. We start with Andy Fagley, a member of the board. Next is Alderman Ross Arnett from Ward 8. We have Michael Tomasini, a member of the board.
Matt.
We have Jake Iverson, who is with Watermark and joins us usually on a regular basis. We have Peter Trogdon, a member of the board. Rita Wildy, a member of the board. Stephen Rice from the City of Annapolis. We have Brigitte Sundstrom, our COA TV. I never get all that right in my one mouthful. Representative, we have Beth Bellis, the harbor master, and we have Debbie Goslin, who's a member of the board. So with that, we do appear to have a quorum, and we will commence. First order of business is the approval of the minutes from July. By the way, we don't have a Kimberly Consoli, our staff recorder, is not here, but she's going to pick up the audio and the video of this meeting, and it'll do the minutes from that. But we do have the minutes from the July, since we didn't have an August meeting, from the July meeting, which I circulated to everybody. Is there a motion to adopt the July minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Tomasini moved it. The adoption, Ms. Wildy seconded it. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye.
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 All right, we have unanimous Kimberly for everyone on the approval of the minutes. So you're just going directly to the old business. The Anne Arundel County MIAB. I listened in on the meeting on the end of July, and it basically focused on the fact that the county was amending one of its critical area provisions. I think it was legislation was ordinance 7122. And what it essentially did was there's a provision in the county code to provide for growth adjustment or growth allocation and within the critical areas. And it applied to commercial properties in particular, but marinas were excluded from that growth allocation permission or provision. So the legislation essentially clarified that marinas could apply along with any other commercial activity to this growth allocation provision to the critical area of the county code. It's nothing affecting the city of Annapolis. It was strictly a county provision. That was the focus of the July meeting. Mr. Tomasini, I think, did you go to or listen in on the August meeting?
I did, and much of the discussion was the same as you just recollected from the July meeting. It was just clarifications for people who had missed that July meeting and were getting an update. There was a little bit of discussion about the general development plan too, Plan 2040, I think it is. But as any maritime industry board that meets in August, it was quick. I mean, like real quick, 20 minutes or less. And most of it was just updating the folks who had missed that July meeting. So.
All right. And Mr. Fagley, you are on tap for did I see? I thought I saw it. Yeah, there you are. Sorry, you're right up to you're the first one in the box here. You're on for the September meeting there. You can join them by Zoom. They're pretty benign and don't take a whole lot of time.
Okay.
Next, Mr. Rice, what's happening economically other than the garage is going up like gangbusters?
It's been a quiet summer.
Well, there's there seems to be a lot of activity going on, including the what was it last weekend? The Songwriters Fest or whatever. That was huge, or it looked like it was.
Yeah, that was a very nice event, and hopefully that will be an annual event as well. And other things happening, of course, in the city. Our commercial vacancy rate is 5%. During July and August, we actually had 7 new expanding or relocating businesses in the city. Also, during the month of August, it was slow for some, but in economic development, we actually assisted 35 businesses and partners. So we were pretty busy. Our economic gardening program is well underway. We have selected 6 maritime businesses, and they're getting economic gardening assistance. We're still managing the seasonal parklet program and the pilot parking lot dining program. And we're also working with the Annapolis Blues soccer team or football club, depending on your which side of the pond you're on. And they will be kicking off their inaugural season next summer, 2023. Also, just a little bit of a carryover from the last meeting with regard to the Maritime Industry Fund. We actually do have a reporting form, and that is under review, and hopefully that will be blessed fairly soon, so we can get those get that form out to the maritime property owners and see where things stand.
All right, and if memory serves me on 02521, once you get those forms, then that dovetails into the annual report.
Yes.
Okay, so that kind of takes care of item G on the list. Alderman Arnett, did you have any questions about that? I know that you had raised that with me at some point, but it sounds like they are at least collecting starting to try to collect the forms. You got to find that button.
I have too many computers running at the same time. Yeah, I'd like to compare the proposed form, which I haven't seen, to the information that is turned in by everybody for their use and occupancy permit, which I think has a very rich source of data, and the use and occupancy permit data might be what we need to track what's going on with the maritime businesses. But I actually raised my hand because last night the city council postponed action on resolution 5422, which is the non-maritime use fee on waterfront property per city zoning code. And that fee schedule is what we would be using these annual reports to look at and base the fees. And we postponed action for 2 reasons. One, it hadn't, and to my knowledge, come to the Maritime Advisory Board, and I think it should. But 2, I was doing some ballpark calculations of what the fees might be in the extreme of, say, a large marina with 17 acres. If you took the 25% or however much you could do for non-maritime uses and multiplied that by the fee, it could end up being a considerable amount of money, which is good news, bad news. It's good news for funding the maritime fee that's supposed to be used to help us develop maritime further in the city, but it could be bad news for a maritime property owner in that it could be a significant chunk of change. I'm glad that Stephen is here because he'd probably be able to clear up what the magnitude of the fees would be, maybe off the top of his head, but certainly for the MAB. But that's why we want to see the form, get the reports, look at the amount of non-maritime use in each of the maritime properties, and from there be able to have a better fix on the fees and I think a sense of the impact the fee would have on the maritime business or conversely, the impact the fee would have in building the Maritime Development Fund.
So for those of you that are not as familiar with 025 and sort of the minutia or details in it, 02521 allowed provided that if a property accumulated a 15% increase in its non-maritime uses, I believe it's through incentives, that there would be a fee, the amount to be set by the city for that. And as Alderman Arnett said, it was to go into the Maritime Industry Fund or in some fund that is designed to provide assistance to or promotion of the maritime. Ross, I didn't know if you had seen, because it wasn't with the original legislation, the fiscal impact note that was posted online. And in that, it was interesting that P&Z staff indicated there are potentially only 3 properties that are large enough to provide enough of the incentives to gather 15% additional non-maritime. Only one of those had expressed interest in expanding its non-maritime use limits, but the application process was not complete. So that's just FYI, but that was the fiscal note that was provided with that legislation, and I just saw it actually I saw it today. I had not seen it before that.
That's with 025, 21?
No, that's the note to R54.
Oh, I remember looking at it, but I didn't absorb it, obviously, because I don't remember what it said the potential impact be. Only 3. We're talking about across all maritime
That's
zones?
what we cannot. The report says we cannot estimate how much the city will collect in fees. The percent increases allowed by the incentives are individually small, so that an owner would have to offer several of the options to get to the 15% benchmark. Planning and zoning staff believe that there are very few properties within the maritime districts that are large enough to provide enough of the incentives to gather 15% additional non-maritime use, thus triggering the fee.
So yes, and in fact, I do remember that now, but I asked Mike LaPlace and Eric Lashinsky, who happened to be the 2 planning people I talked to, that was somewhat nebulous. I still worried that if somebody took maximum advantage and they were a big maritime property holder, I couldn't really get a sense of how much the fee would be. That seems to imply it would be small. And if it is, as I said before, that's good news, bad news. I guess bad news, good news. It's bad news for the fund, good news in that it's not going to hamper current maritime operations. Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought you were finished.
No, it's perfect time for you to speak up and enlighten me and us.
Just a couple of quick things. 2521 gave 15% increase non-maritime allowance for WMM, WMI, and WME, but that's assuming you meet one of the criteria for the trigger. So this is triggered if you meet one of the criteria, and it needs to be a working boat yard with 20,000 square feet and a 30-ton boat lift, or a seafood processing of 9,000 square feet facility, on-land boat storage of at least 25,000 square feet, or a yacht and sailing club providing in-water and on-land boat storage, and or a fuel dock. So that's the trigger. Those are the triggers that could potentially get a property from, where they were to an additional 15% non-maritime, allowance. Now, above and beyond that, there are some water access incentives. And so if you meet the trigger standard, you can go the additional 15%. But if you can meet the water access incentive or you take advantage of that, then you can get an additional 10% in WMM, an additional 5% in WMI, an additional 5% in WME. It's only that those additional 10, 5, and 5 percentages that would trigger any sort of payment to the city.
Right, it has
To
to
go-
exceed, it has to exceed the 15%.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly.
To go into the sequestered fund that would encourage the maritime industry in the city.
Exactly.
And
Does it
so
say that anywhere in here? Because I was looking for that and I couldn't see that distinction.
So R5422, let me pull it up.
that's what I'm trying to do right now as well.
Printers are a great asset these days. I'm looking at it.
It says if there's an increase in non-maritime uses granted through the above incentives.
Right, through the incentives.
So it says at the very top, non-maritime use fee on waterfront property per city zoning code. And it says 4 in the 4 section. Oh, I just lost it. Sorry. Okay, where is the whereas? I'm sorry, I lost it. So establishes the fee for non-maritime uses granted through the water access incentives allowed by the zoning requirements. So it's the water access incentives, which is the additional 10, 5, or 5%.
So is that defined somewhere, incentive versus trigger?
Yes.
That's in
Mm.
025. And Debbie, if you read the staff report,
Yeah,
it goes into some detail about their allowing zones to exceed their by right allowed percentages of non-maritime use. In essence, the code defines certain water access improvements which a property owner can establish to benefit public water access. In return, the owner is allowed additional square footage to lease. In WMM, it can go up to 10%, and WME and WMI an additional 5%. So I think the interpretation is the first 15% does not incur a fee or whatever the percent is. And then above that, if you get into the water access incentives, then that fee then you pay a fee for that additional portion over and above the 15%, which is over and above whatever percent you had in the first place.
so say 15 years from now, and Stephen has retired and moved to Florida, and the mayor is, a different person. Can this be?
The mayor's Jake.
I'll vote for that. Could this be interpreted differently? That's my concern.
I'm not so sure that if it's been interpreted for as long as Stephen is here and we have consistent mayors that are interpreting it this way, it is unlikely that it will be reinterpreted differently. What would happen is that the council will vote to reinterpret it differently.
Probably not to the benefit of the landowner.
That is more likely than a new interpretation. But when you look at what the fiscal impact note refers to and the and what the code says and what Stephen is looking at, it appears reasonably clear that the fee is on the increase above the increase to the increase.
Completely clear.
Yeah, well, and that's why we postponed action last night, because Alderman Savage and I realized that it hadn't been to you, and we wanted to make sure that as our advisors on Maritime, you had seen it, registered, you didn't have any problems or suggestions, and And then I had asked to get some sense, and I'm still asking, some sense of the order of magnitude. Are we contributing $3,000 a year to this fund or $100,000? And I'm sure that's something that can be calculated, but it's not registering in my mind.
So just if as an example, let's just say we have an 60,000 gross square foot area property in WMM. And there's that last 10% that would be eligible if they take advantage of the water access incentive. Based upon R 5422, their annual, burden to the city would be $6,000.
Okay,
And
So-
it's on the square footage, Ross. It's not on the land area.
right.
Correct.
Of the additional structure.
Right.
Yeah.
Or of the additional use in an existing structure.
Yeah, I was more concerned with the WMI, which has bigger properties and therefore could have bigger new spaces that are non-maritime added to them. And I just wanted to make sure that we were in the bounds of reasonableness on both sides of the intent. We want to build up the fund, the incentive fund, but we don't want to kill the marine operations that are in place now.
But let's take a large 14-acre yet to be named parcel.
17 acres.
17 acres. If on that particular parcel right now, there is no non-maritime, so they could go to 15% non-maritime in existing buildings without paying a fee. They could go to another 10%, and I don't know what their square footage of buildings might be, but it's certainly far less than 17 acres. They could go to another 10% with a fee, or they could build a new building, in which event they would get the first 15% free, and the next 10% would they pay a fee for. So that's just my take off the top of my head, the way the calculation would go. But Mr. Tomasini has his hand up or he's scratching his head, one or the other.
So, yeah, the big parcel would be WMI, which would be only an additional 5% for water access incentives. And any new buildings have to be maritime because they're not included in the current rentable square footage of those parcels. So new buildings on those parcels don't get 15% non-maritime because they're not current square footage. That's the way I understand it.
I'm not positive about that, but in
Yeah.
either event, I think to Ross's point, the incremental increase, even at $1 a square foot, will be relatively minor when it's based on the building and not on the acreage.
And there was discussion during the task force meetings that even that initial 15% might also garner some kind of benefit to the fund. So even if you had a trigger and you got that additional 15%, there may be some kind of establishment of a fund that would come out of that initial 15%.
I don't remember I didn't go back and look at 02521. Obviously, we're going to have to do that probably at our next meeting.
Or we're going to have to, right, we're going to have to establish the fee structure, but it wasn't, the initial 15% bump was not defined as having no fee attached to it at the time.
All right.
What R54 does though is that it limits it just to that extra, the piece that's tied to the incentives.
So back around to you, Ross. I'm assuming that since it's been postponed and it's going to get referred to us, we'll take it up at the October meeting and report out, and it'll be what it'll be.
Thank you for that. And then Stephen, the day the gathering form will also be coming to the MAB.
I don't have a problem with that once it's approved by planning and zoning. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But
So
let
we'd
me
want to-
ask, do we want to wait till our October meeting, or just give it to us to look at? But let's get the survey out. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
more inclined to say, let's get the form. If P and Z has a form, let's get it out. I mean, do I need to, does the board need to look at it? In particular, before it goes out? We can always tweak it later for next year, but it seemed to me we get it out and let's get the
Well,
data.
Yeah, I
The
agree.
council would like to look at it.
Sure,
And I think the main purpose that Rob and I had for postponing last night is we wanted to make sure we have total transparency. Everybody knows what's going on. And quite frankly, this meeting has expressed some of the same confusion and lack of remembrance of what we did that I was feeling. And I think I'm the one on the council that paid the most attention to what the task force was doing. So it was one of these look before you leap kinds of things. Let's make sure everybody is aware of what's happening.
All right, so I take it from that, Stephen, if you'll obviously provide a copy to Alderman Arnett and council members, you could send me a copy and I'll circulate it to the board. I won't necessarily, I don't see that holding it up for the board to comment on is probably necessary, but certainly council may want to comment on it.
Sounds good.
All right, Duncan, you have you're like the Maytag repairman on the comprehensive plan, you know?
I love that. Pardon me, I have terrible laryngitis. I'm afraid I've heard nothing from Mr. Lazinski, but we stand by with bated breath.
It will be comprehensive at the rate that we're going.
Terry, if I could
Um,
just make a statement, we, once you find a good horse, you load them up, and Eric has so many different things going on, like the water access study and a whole bunch of other things. And I've talked to both Mike Melanoff and Michael LaPlace saying, and in fact, he did just recently hire somebody new who he is excited about. So I hope it meets his expectations. But we really have loaded him up with a lot of different things to do. And I think the comp plan may suffer a little bit because of that.
2040 is a ways out.
Yeah, it is.
Eric is also the head coach of the Annapolis Soccer Club Green Gators. So
All right.
the comp plan may have to wait until after soccer season is done.
I love it. Well, I'm here. I'm here.
Beth, turning to you on any update on the street end upgrades or the wayward stray electric that's been running around Eastport Yacht Club and the Truxton Park?
Yes, I have updates on both. I shared a document with you, Terry, which is a little hard to read. I can go over it in a moment, but first I suppose I'll cover the street ends. I did take a half-day boat trip with our DNR grantors to try to fully understand, and I know you're probably wondering, how have you been in this job 6 years? But it feels like the rules have been changing a little bit. But I suppose it's because I've never fully understood them. So all of our grant submissions were due on the 15th. We did submit 3 projects, but what we learned on our boat trip was the money that comes from waterway improvement grants, which is what we're trying to fund our street end improvements, comes from motorized boats. And so they only want to see improvements that will improve things for motorized boats. So if you're looking to get folks, pedestrians or cars out on the waterway access, which is what the mayor's office is super interested in, that's not what they're interested in. They're interested in any project that would help a motorized boater to anchor a bigger boat and or take a smaller boat to a street end to go and get groceries or go to a restaurant. So we went to almost every single street end with them, and we looked at them because we've been trying to improve so many different spaces. And at the end of the day, we came up with 3 projects and we did submit them. And I'm pleased to say that Department of Public Works has been so helpful. They've actually given us an engineer to help submit all of these. And this is unprecedented. This is new. And I think it's going to be so much more productive. So we have 3 projects that we're asking for $250,000 for each project. The first is Hawkins Cove. That will be dredging and access. The second will be 4th Street, because I did not realize until quite recently when I came by water that 4th Street at Davis's Pub is in a lot of disrepair. And then Shipswright. And this is different than anything we've ever looked at before, because we didn't realize that all of these community docks, like Monticello, Conduit, all of the docks that are in our neighborhoods, they said, absolutely not. We're not going to fund that. That's not, this money is not for your neighborhood docks, for people that have annual moorings. It is for anchored boaters, transient mooring customers. It is that is what the money is for. So we think that priority 2 and 3, 4th Street and Shipwright, will score very well. We are not certain that Hawkins Cove will score well, because the intent of that project is to get pedestrians out on the waterway, and that's not what the money is for. But we put our best foot forward. We did 3 very good applications, and I can also say that 6th Street and Chestnut Avenue are well underway. The architecture and engineering is done for Cheston. I think the bidding is out, so work is going to start soon. And 6th Street, I think we're done with concepts, if I'm right. And then we're going to move towards like dredging, pocket park, and or floating dock. So we have a lot of projects in the work, and we feel good about moving forward. With regard to electricity in the water, let me look at the document.
I'm looking at what you sent me, and I will circulate it at the end of the meeting. But Public Works has worked, and they've only determined that the city's pier at Truxton Boat Ramp is not the source of electrical current in the water, which means it's coming from somewhere else. One assumption is that it's from some private dock nearby. And then it says that under current city code, the city does not have authority to survey private piers in areas adjacent to the boat ramp. But Beth, it would seem to me that the fire marshal certainly has the authority, if they're supposed to be grounding or something in permitted piers, that the fire marshal will go on.
I disagree with that assessment. I could certainly show the group a section of Title 15 that I think the city is entitled to bring these folks up to some standard. I would also say that the thinking regarding swimming around marinas has changed. So if you go to a website called electricshockdrowning.org, what you will learn is that there are many drownings that have happened where people said, oh, this person was a strong swimmer, we don't know why they drowned. There's a growing body of evidence that says that swimming near any marina, as defined by any place that has more than 3 electrical outlets, is dangerous and should never be done.
Well, I mean, it seems to me this is really dragged on as an investigative effort that should not have taken this long or still be going on. This is not a casting aspersion on you, Beth. This is just a frustrated comment that if it's not coming from Truxton Park, then let's start knocking on doors and see where it's coming from so we can get this cleared up.
But I would also note that there's a significant level.
I'd put Mr. Fagley in charge. He'd probably find it in 20 minutes.
I would also note that there's a significant level of electricity coming around the waters around EYC. And the Coast Guard's been out and measured that. And I pushed that over to the city some time ago, and I don't have any results there. So I think 2 things need to happen. I think one, there needs to be an education sort of outreach about swimming near marinas and electricity and water. But I'm not sure where the original complaint came from, but Truxton is not the only place. And then we need to also make sure that we investigate what's happening around EYC, because the Coast Guard has indicated, I want to say, can't remember what the email said, but I'll check. Well, while someone else is talking, I'll check and then I'll get back with the group.
All right.
Beth, if I could mention, can you hear me?
Okay?
Yes.
That the local divers are authorities on where the trouble spots are. Ask any of them. There are 4 of them that I know of, and they can all tell you where you need to stay away from.
Which
Right there.
which I assume also would mean where to look for the problem.
Yes. Luckily, salt water and brackish water is a lot less deadly than freshwater. Freshwater, the problems are tenfold what they are here. But still,
Yeah, I agree. I
tolerate-
think if we were in a lake, you're right, this would have been deadly.
All right, well, we'll keep this on the agenda so that it stays on the radar at least. But it would seems to me that it ought to be some easier solution than several months of hunting and pecking like on a typewriter by fingers, that you can ought to be able to find out where it's coming from at least. Mike, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering on the limits on the waterway improvement grants, is there something in those grants that can be used to expand pump out facilities at city properties?
Those are different grants. Those are not waterway improvement grants.
Got it.
So we're working with DNR to try to see if it makes sense for us to have a pump out at City Dock. But in truth, that's largely selfish, because we often run our pump out boat and we can't find any place to pump off. People are shutting us down and closing their doors to us. So we just want to be able to run our boat, pump out as many boats as possible, and be able to pump off without drama and having people say, oh, it's not working.
Right.
So speaking of, at the very least, whether or not the above ground infrastructure is put in immediately, it would seem to me that at the very least, that the underground infrastructure to allow for a pump out facility at City Dock needs to go in when we're building City Dock, rebuilding City Dock, and not suddenly a year later come in and take a jackhammer and start jackhammering up to connect it again. At least let's get the lower part infrastructure in. We can always put the hoses on later, but certainly that should be a priority somewhere along City Dock. Nothing else for the commercial vessels, and as we're trying to encourage more and more to come in, that we have facilities to accommodate them that are convenient and easy to use. So
Yes, I agree. And we have noted that if there is to be a new ferry, maybe an electric ferry, it would be a good idea to maybe have a pump facility in the same zone, because we all know that waterfront docking is at a premium. And so our thought is that if we could do 2 purposes at one dock, and we have identified some places for that. And I've talked to Jackie Goud about that. So we're in conversations about that, and we're thinking about that.
All right. Yeah, I mean, that just needs, and that was in the, Mike can correct me, but I think that was also one of the recommendations in the City Dock plan, among other things, was that, you know, it be that type of a facility be incorporated with that, recognizing that it's going to be needed at some point.
Terry, can I make a couple of comments? It's Ross.
Sure.
I had my hand up. First of all, on the ladder, right now is the time to get that pump out locked in. This fall is when the plans for City Dock, which are still fairly much in flux, but it's when they're going to be locked up, because Hillman Garage is moving surprisingly well along. And once it's done, we can immediately commence with the work on City Dock. So this fall, according to Eileen Fogarty, is the time to get all of the attributes that we want to put in the city dock into the plans. On the currents in the water, before David Gerald left as city manager, he and I discussed this, and he feels that the city has looked at all of its potential sources and they've thrown it over to BG&E. I kind of have the sense that it's not a high priority for BG&E. They'd rather be digging up the streets in Eastport to put in gas lines and things like that. But I think that a urging from the MAB to the administration could well be in order, because even though, as Andy says, it's not deadly, it's still not something we should just drag on and drag on and drag on, because it's not anybody's priority.
In regard to the pump out at City Dock, we've had a number of conversations with David Gerald over the last 2 or 3 years also, to make sure that it is put in during the construction. And that was met positively from the mayor and from the city, and not just for visiting boats, but for Harbor Queen as well, particularly now that there is a no discharge zone in place.
Right. But we've got to remember we've had a change in the city. So these things continually need to be brought, and I'm part of that problem, brought to our attention. When you have a change in the leadership, that was, and Mike Melanoff, I think, is going to be great, but he really wasn't involved in all of this. So we do need to remind him about all of these things.
It's a good reminder. Thanks.
We just need to remember too that all the funding for the pump outs, if it's strictly grant funding, is recreational only. Doesn't mean we're not going to pump off all of our commercial boats, but the push can't come. I don't think if we want it grant funded, we can't push it from a commercial boat standpoint, even though we know we're not going to let our commercial boats go wanting.
But it seems to me that you just need to use whatever money is appropriate to make that happen for the benefit of the maritime businesses and the scope of the master plan that was.
Absolutely. We have to be careful how we phrase it so we can make sure it makes sense for them.
And it's not just the maritime businesses. We want Annapolis to be a great place for people to visit by boat, and those amenities are certainly important to be able to get the pump out and all the other things they need to get.
And again, we're talking sort of the infrastructure underneath, which is, I'm assuming, a line running from point Y on the water to point X inland somewhere, to which later on, under somebody's funding, you hook up the actual pumping facility, and now you're just using a line that's already in place. But I leave that to the, but I do have another question about hearkening back to the grants and the street end parks. As I understand what you were saying is that we can, some of this grant money that we thought was going to be used, or what we have been using for street end parks, cannot be used if it is to improve a street end park that is essentially not accessible to motorized vessels. Am I correct about that? Motorized recreational vessels.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. And so one of the example I would give is Thompson Street. So we formerly were funded for Thompson, and then when we visited the site, they said absolutely not. You will not get one dime for Thompson Street because it is essentially a community pier. And it is too shallow for motorboats to come. And so essentially, like there's not a close by grocery store or restaurant for a motorboat to go to. And they said, I'm sorry, we would not fund this.
So are there street ends that could be funded if in fact there a portion or all of the street end was made accessible to motor, and when you say I'm assuming a motorized dinghy is one of the things that applies. that counts for, access for a motorized vessel. So are there street end parks that we can either by regulation or simply ultimately by enforcement say, the X portion of this dock has to remain open for access by motorized vessels?
So that's absolutely going to happen. So for example, Lafayette is entirely inhabited by annual mooring customers.
Right.
So unfortunately, those customers are going to get the very bad news that they're no longer allowed to keep their dinghy there permanently because that was grant funded. And so we looked with this team of grantors at several street ends like Monticello and Conduit. And for many, many of those street ends, they said this is not appropriate, and this is not appropriate, and this is not appropriate. So places like 4th Street, wonderful. Amos Garrett, probably fine. Anything that's near a grocery store or a restaurant, anything that transient boaters would be going to pop off and grab something is great. But anything...
We just put a restaurant on Southgate.
Okay, we'll look at that. I'm on it. But like, if you just want to sit, if you live on Monticello and you want to sit in the Adirondacks and drink wine with your neighbors, then that's not what a waterway improvement grant. I mean, there might be other grants. It doesn't mean we shouldn't improve it. It just means waterway improvement funds, which are funded by motorized boaters paying these fees.
Right.
It just means that those funds can't be used for your community street end. And so there's lots of things we can use them for, but those are not those things.
All right. The deeper we dive into the weeds of grant funding, the more nuances there is more nuances appear as we go along, and in the rush to take the money, we sometimes, I guess, we've seen that the consequences ultimately might catch up with us.
That can happen.
All right. I think we need to collectively keep put our thinking caps on to see whether the city funds. I mean, I guess it's a question of on the places like Thompson Street that are basically community docking facilities. How do we fund the improvements? Does the city pay for the improvements? Do the users pay for the improvements? Is it a combination? Do you kick the users off so that we have waterway funds and then motorized vessels come, but they don't qualify because there's not a restaurant or shopping nearby? So
we actually have a plan for Thompson Street. And I don't know that the citizens will love it, but what we'd like to do is demo the existing pier is dangerous. We'd like to demo that. And we'd like to put in a jet dock because we've had one donated. So we'd like to do something sort of quick and dirty that's safe and that's an improvement.
I was just using Thompson Street as a placeholder. I wasn't focusing on Thompson Street, but
Gotcha.
as a community, as a placeholder for the concept of a community dock versus a motorized access dinghy.
No, I understand. We're just trying to think of ways to solve all of the street end dilemmas, and some have easier solutions than others.
Well, we will continue to think about that, and it may just have to be on a one after another basis, and it's not going to be one size fits all at this point. The elusive harbor tour, we're basically getting past the harbor tour season, so I will maybe perhaps try to revisit that. I didn't get any for all the interest in water access. I couldn't get the mayor's office interested in going on a harbor tour. But I guess everybody gets on the water quite a bit already, so we'll see. The public water access plan, Stephen, do you have anything? I mean, Eric gave us a very good presentation on the plan. I know he was collecting data. Any update on where we are on that?
I'm sorry, that's not my forte.
I understand. All right, so we'll pass on that. Um, Beth, I don't think there's been anything. I know, I haven't talked to Rick Nelson over at Annapolis Sailing School. He hasn't called me lately. I don't think there's been anything, whether he's put up any signage at the end of his dock, I don't know. And I assume he's not been in touch with you about adding a sign or two on the existing the channel markers coming in. We will pass on that. Duncan, anything between you and Andy on the echo system, the rebroadcast system?
Right. Andy and I have not spoken, but Andy and I were going to be speaking. Andy, what can you tell us?
I left you a message. I don't know whether that ever got to you. It was a long and convoluted message about 2 months ago. And I called Dave Duvall, former owner of Cito, and he's the one who had the system up and running. The answer I'm going to give is not the answer we want to hear. Basically, the people who bought the rights to use the two marine operator stations, 22 and 23 or something like that, no longer have the rights. The company's bankrupt. They not only don't have the equipment to sell you to operate it, but they no longer have access to those channels to use to operate it. So that thing is gone and it's not coming back. And he was spending a great deal of money, I think in the order of $250 a month, to have that system, which he was able to legitimize because it was a little bit of advertising for his company at the time. What we're talking about, it, in case everybody doesn't know, is it's an automated radio response on a given channel where you key the mic and say anything you want, and it'll wait 5 seconds and say it back to you. It's a way to get a radio check without being on channel 9 or channel 16. And it's great. In the process, one could add, this is from the lovely city of Annapolis, don't forget to get a pump out, or whatever one wants to say in that regard. And the bottom line is right now, it isn't happening and there's no great plans to make it happen.
So Andy, and I think the name that comes to mind was Markel or Martel.
Yeah.
But if they don't have the rights anymore, they've reverted to somebody. Who do they revert to?
The FCC, I think. I think they were leasing them from the FCC.
So is there any reason we can't lease them from the FCC?
This was a nationwide thing that people were doing this all over the country for an amount of money, and that amount of money was going to the lease. We are not big enough potatoes to rank in procuring that kind of thing, is what I was led to believe. That has to be a group participation thing, and we need a much larger group.
So you would have the rights in San Diego, you would have the rights in Los Angeles, you would have the rights wherever.
Yeah, well, nationwide, I believe.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
So
And they
Andy,
made it go, but they no longer make it go. And Dave Duvall's a wonderful guy, and he's available by phone if anyone wants to talk to him further. But he gave me a solid half hour of his time describing how the system worked and why it isn't working. He said if anyone would know more, it's the owner, the top dog at Boat US. And that there's somebody who is contactable, and he knew the guy's name. I don't have it in front of me.
All right.
maybe I'll stop by and see you one of these days and chat about that. Catch up.
Great.
Yeah, it sounds like there's two places to maybe explore. One is whether the FCC would license it regionally as opposed to nationally. And the second question would be, I don't know who, Debbie, you probably remember who was the local woman that was president of Boat US? I mean, just recently.
Margaret Podlick?
Margaret Podlick. Yeah, she's no longer president or CEO or whatever she was, her title was.
She works for the Annapolis, no, it's the Boat and Yacht Council. She works right in Eastport.
ABYC, right. But I just remember she was head is, I'll use that term generically, Boat US until about 2 or 3 years ago. So she might know who have an entree into the person. But Duncan, you and Andy follow up, and maybe we should think about contacting the FCC about whether they would consider a regional license. You know.
Well, beyond that, one needs the equipment necessary to make it go, which is no longer available either.
That's step 2. If we don't have the license, we don't need the equipment. But if we have the license, now we start looking for the equipment. It may be that Martell has some equipment that is sitting in a warehouse somewhere. The bankruptcy trustee will sell it. All right, Beth, anything else on the St. Mary's Cove shoreline? Not. All right, let's jump to the new business. The item C we already talked about, which is a Maritime Hall of Fame. So I had a call recently, the last meeting was in July. I had a call in August from Ellen Moyer, and we had breakfast, and she is interested in resurrecting a Maryland Maritime Hall of Fame, not a sailing Hall of Fame so much as a Maritime Hall of Fame. And as we kicked it around a little bit, it would be, the concept would be more in line with recognizing local maritime individuals across the board. It could be a waterman, it could be a powerboat builder, it could be sport fishing on the head boat captain on the bay, crabbers, whatever, as well as sailors, as a Maryland Maritime Hall of Fame. I think her plan was a bit more expansive than my thinking would necessarily go, but it was intriguing that it could be a Hall of Fame, a local Hall of Fame. I mean, high schools have their Hall of Fame. Everybody has a Hall of Fame for their particular organization. And certainly it makes some sense if we were to recognize within Maryland that there are contributors to the maritime industry that are worthy of a, quote, Hall of Fame designation, but not necessarily just sailing.
The one that's sort of represented at the Boatyard Bar and Grill that's an Annapolis one, but it's not just sailing.
Right. And I think that was where I was pushing the discussion towards, if we're going to do something that is going to be, effective in Maryland, that it needs to broaden the base and not just be sailing. And maybe I'd forgotten about the fact that Dick had basically a little corner in the boatyard there of a sort of a Hall of Fame and pictures on the wall, etc. And that might be worthwhile. But one of the things and I don't have the time on my plate, having just moved my office and everything else that's going on, to undertake it. But if there's somebody on the board that would like to coordinate with Ellen, at least in the short term, I'm not going to put you on the spot to raise your hand now, but please send me an email tonight or in the morning and let me know, because I do think it's probably something worth exploring, and whether it's in conjunction with with the Maritime Museum, whether it's in conjunction with the boatyard, whether it's a standalone project, it does have some attraction as an Annapolis-based, and as we move with City Dock and whatever's going to happen with Berta's house and everything else, there's there may be an opportunity there to recognize a broader, but more local but broader maritime, notable figures in the maritime industry, one sort or another. Yes, Duncan.
It seems to me we got to be a little careful on this. It may fall into the same trap as we have with the waterfront center, where it's not funded and it really doesn't have proper oversight is not quite the right word, but there've got to be criteria in place for what we're really looking for and a funding model. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, there's a ton of, the Sailing Hall of Fame taught us a number of lessons along the way. We have to be careful that we don't bite off more than we're able to sustain and build from that, as opposed to bite off more than we can sustain and then not have anything. So that's a good point. And it was one reason I'm guardedly optimistic and overly cautious. Let's put it that way.
Terry, I think the history of the Annapolis Maritime Hall of Fame is exactly what you're talking about. It's not just sailing; it has to do with other boat, waterfront characters, entrepreneurs, etc. And the Maritime Museum may have the history on it because they were the custodians of the Annapolis Maritime Hall of Fame. And Dick Franier just took the exhibit part of it, but the Maritime Museum may still have the history of it and whether there's bylaws or whatever. And
Ellen began that many years ago.
yeah, I think so. And so somebody has the books on it, and I have a feeling it's the museum. And that's probably a good start, because the intention of that Hall of Fame was not sailing per se. And so it had a wide range of honorees besides some that were sailing. And I have a feeling that the museum may have more information on it, along with Ellen Moyer.
Well, I happen to, on a different matter, happen to have a breakfast meeting with Eric Rubin, and we were talking about the Annapolis Maritime Museum and its interrelationship in the city. And he used to get back to me at some point. There's nothing was determined or decided, other than he just wanted to let us know that the Maritime Museum is looking forward to reestablishing a more positive working relationship with the city. And I said, for him to get back to me, and we'll continue to have discussion. But one of the things that I did raise with him was the fact that I had this meeting with Ellen. He did not seem to recall a connection with the Annapolis, I'm sorry, with an Annapolis Hall of Fame connection with the Annapolis Maritime Museum, but that isn't to say that it wasn't there along the way. But again, if somebody will raise their hand off camera, and I can share a little bit more, and we can reach out to the Maritime Museum as well as to Dick Franio, and maybe see if we can't coordinate or at least facilitate the effort to resurrect not just an Annapolis Hall of Fame, but to broaden that to a Maryland Maritime Hall of Fame, and get some traction with it. Unless anybody has any questions on that, we'll move to the last topic.
Oops. Beth has her hand up.
I'm sorry, Beth.
I just wanted to backtrack because I couldn't get myself off of mute. I know that you asked a question about St. Mary's. I do have an update.
Okay.
St. Mary's has lost their funding. I did speak to DNR yesterday. They have to, I guess their path forward is to try to find a new contractor with a new concept. But essentially DNR has said their concepts will not, essentially the concept they have seen will not be approved and they don't see the project moving forward.
All right. I will actually take it off the agenda until I hear more, until you bring it back up again and let me know to put it back on the agenda. So that will shorten the list the next time. So, and the item under new business B, I put on really not to have any real substantive discussion or decision on it, but we have, and it is becoming more and more apparent, at least from the more recent meetings we've had, that there is we're going to have to at some point address, or the city's going to have to at some point address, the interrelationship of what constitutes a short-term rental or a B&B vis-a-vis commercial activity at City Dock or on the city moorings. Because on the one hand, you've got certainly under Title 15, a very clear, almost one line sentence that says there shall be no commercial activity at City Dock except in conjunction with the charter dock policy or a lease with the city. I mean, it can't be clear. On the other hand, you've got city moorings, which are, I assume, fall under some prohibition for commercial activity, and yet you have the gamut of vessels that are either blatantly come into City Dock and then simply the owner rents them out for a short-term rental or B&B type rental for the weekend or for the week, and it never gets underway, and it's just basically a party boat to live on, which is probably would fall under commercial activity. To the other end of the spectrum, where somebody comes in, ties up at City Dock on a boat they have chartered from somewhere else and comes in, and they should, they're not subject, should not be subject to any prohibition about commercial activity at City Dock. But one could make some kind of an argument that, well, whether you're renting the boat out of town and bringing it to City Dock, or the boat comes to City Dock and you're renting it at City Dock, what is the difference? These are not going to be easy questions, and frankly, they may not even percolate up to the top of the priority list, depending upon what we hear from Beth or from others that is happening. And certainly come winter, some of these problems go away only to resurrect themselves next spring, when people have had an opportunity to get more creative, thinking about it over a hot buttered rum during the middle of the winter. So I just want everybody to kind of keep that on their radar. At the next meeting, let us know if there's been, what you've heard or found out in terms of a problem, not a problem. I don't want to, use a hammer to swat a fly if the fly isn't bothering us. But I can see just over the last few months that it has become a topic of conversation. Whether it's become an issue is probably debatable, but it's at least a topic of conversation that we ought to keep on our radar. And Beth, I will let you weigh in because you're the closest to it.
Just be quick about it, but I have had meetings with Coast Guard and Ashley Leonard, and this is a growing problem, and they're doing a lot of work in National Harbor. And what we're finding is that there are a lot of people, if you look at the news site called Boat Setters, there's so many news sites and sites that would say such things as like, take my 25-foot whaler for your bachelorette party. And a lot of it is illegal federally. Coast Guard has agreed to do some fact-finding, investigative sort of patrols in our area, but it is a growing problem, and we need to be aware that folks that are entrepreneurial could take over spots that our residents and our visitors want to occupy. And so we have you know, we have identified several problems. We've given warnings, we've given tickets, and this is not a small problem, and it will continue to grow in my view.
Well, I think with the popularity of short-term rentals that we see, and maybe it'll run its course, maybe it won't, but we certainly, they certainly are prevalent, and they are creative. And whether it's a short-term rental of an RV, whether it's a short-term rental of a boat, like you say, whether it's for a bachelor party or a house in, you know, at the beach, whatever it is, we are seeing it. Ross's ward, my ward, sees it on every weekend, and magnified it on Navy football weekends. But let's just, I think I'd like everybody to keep it on their radar in terms of what the activities on the water that might fall into these categories that we at least need to be cognizant of, and maybe think about what action may or may not need to be taken for those. So that's all I really have to say about that topic, other than it's probably going to be one that we're going to leave on the agenda and is going to come up from time to time. So with that, that concludes the agenda. I'll just go around. Andy, anything good for the good of the order?
Not at this time, thanks.
Ross?
Nope.
Jake?
Nothing, thank
You shake your head. Peter?
Yeah, a couple of things I'd like to mention. The boat shows have been working with the City Dock team since last spring with their redevelopment design. And we've delivered a list of requirements that work for us. And we know that we're meeting this month, and we'll be touring the design team through the shows again to see if they can't deliver a design that meets all of our needs. One of our concerns today is a large grass area that's raised up won't allow us to run heavy equipment to set up on that surface. So they're investigating, for example, you know, what surfaces they can deliver to meet their needs, and also we could run a forklift with some heavy equipment on it, that sort of thing, and what to do with trees and shade structures, and how to make that all work for everyone. So there's a lot of stakeholders, and that's an interesting ongoing exchange of information. The other thing I wanted to point out is that Thursday, October 6th is the opening day for the Powerboat show. And then it'll be followed on Thursday, October 13th with the Sailboat show. Both shows are essentially full with all the exhibitor space we have is basically committed. There might be a couple small spots here and there available, but the shows are filled up, and ticket sales are record breaking before the show. So please come down, enjoy the show, and hope to see you there.
Are there going to be any tickets left?
Oh yeah, there's a ticket for all of you.
I'll hold you to that then.
Okay.
Good. Well, thank you for that update. Is there can we work in the fact that we need the pump out infrastructure line installed so we can hook up to the porta potties at the show?
Exactly. We definitely need that, and we're right in line with Jake's needs, you know, to pump that boat and all those facilities there. So I think they're at the table too. So we gotta keep the design team focused. They've been essentially directed to work on the garage, which is understandable, and I think that's coming along great. So I think they're going to turn their focus here middle of September. I've been told by Eileen that they'll be back working on City Dock, and so it's going to be a busy fall talking to them, I believe.
That's great, and I hope that the design of the garage is pretty well complete at this point.
Yeah, sure.
Debbie.
Nothing except that talking about entrepreneurs, friends of mine said that they have neighbors who are renting their pool out online by the hour. I think the neighborhood is going to come up with a new policy about that.
It's entrepreneurs. Frida,
Nothing for the group. Thank you very much.
all right, Duncan.
Nothing for the group, but I am going to go out and find my voice.
You might put an ad to Capitol under, lost and found. Scott? Shake your head. That was a shake.
Nothing else from me. Thank you.
All right, Mike? All right,
That's because Bill Woodward is no longer on the board, and I know that he'd like to spread the word to this group. The Seafarers is hosting their first annual sailing regatta. I think it's this Saturday. There's information on their website. It's an all-day event with like an after party to include the yacht club property there at the Seafarers Yacht Club and the park across the street. So I just think it's a really neat event happening here in Eastport, and the first time that they're trying it with the Seafarers. So
that's great. That's great. If you talk to Bill, ask him to remind us, and so we can get the word out at the city, get it on the city calendar or whatever too.
Okay. Yep. Will do.
Stephen, anything else?
I want to work on my backstroke, so I'm going to call you, Debbie.
It's not my pool.
Beth, anything?
No, nothing more. Thank you so much.
All right, and Brigitte, is there, I think that pretty well wraps it up. Let me do this. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Mr. Fagley, Mr. Trogdon, second, all in favor? Aye. Unanimous. Brigitte, you can conclude this. Kimberly.